Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. For those that are just coming on with us today, please feel free to use the chat, your name, your organization, or where you work and where you're from. We'd love to hear from the folks on the line today. Awesome. We're seeing some folks in the chat. Thank you so much for being here with us. We'll get started in 1 minute. Awesome. Well, we have a great group with us here today. Thank you all so much for joining. We'll go ahead and get started, and we will probably have a few more folks join us as we're kicking off the conversation. So, hi, everyone. My name is Taylor Mag, and I am the Director of Workforce Development Policy for PPI, the Progressive Policy Institute, and I lead our New Skills for New Economy project. I would like to welcome everyone to the fourth webinar in our Future of High School series. This series is done in partnership with the 74 and PPI's Reinventing America's Schools and New Skills for New Economy projects. Briefly, just for background before we dive into the conversation, PPI is a think tank in DC. Our mission is to create and promote bold and pragmatic policy solutions that solve America's most pressing challenges. Education and workforce are two issues the organization is highly focused on. That is why last spring we kicked off this series, highlighting examples that are working at the intersection of these two systems to transform the status quo and integrate not only high-quality academic coursework, but career learning and experiences as well. And this work is increasingly important. Today, over 4 million young people ages 16 to 24 are detached from school and work. That's why it's so important for PPI and the 74 to lift up innovations and best practices happening on the ground and in states that are helping young people to advance in school and their careers. As a refresher, so far in our series, we've highlighted 3 other regions in our country. We've highlighted the Academy of Health Sciences in Maryland and the school's unique partnership with PG County Community College and Bowie State University, the oldest HBCU in Maryland. Our second webinar highlighted Purdue Polytechnic High School. PPHS, a charter school, prepares students to succeed in technical, STEM-related post-secondary programs in high-tech careers. Our third webinar highlighted the northwest suburbs of Chicago and High School District 214, lifting up their partnership with Harper Community College and Northwest Community Hospital to develop and scale their Health Career Pathways program, including their nursing apprenticeship program. Today, we're headed to Minnesota to speak with policymakers, advocacy leaders, and practitioners on the ground to discuss recent policy wins in the legislature that advance career pathways in construction and how these laws are helping to support schools like the Gap School, which we'll learn more about, an alternative school in St. Paul, Minnesota, serving students ages 16 to 24, enabling them to learn marketable construction skills while supporting the construction of homes to help low-income families in the community. Of course, our wonderful speakers can speak more to these trends I discuss and these impressive efforts that they're doing. So with that, I'll briefly introduce our panel and we'll get started with questions today. So first, we have Dr. Jody Nelson, the Executive Director of Change, Inc., in which Gap School is one of their active programs. Hi, Jody. Welcome. We have Representative Matt. Oh, go ahead.
I said, thank you. Glad to be here.
Awesome. Thanks, Jody. We have Representative Matt Norris, who represents District 32B in Minnesota's House of Representatives. Hi, Matt. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to talk about the work you're doing in the state.
Great to be here. Thank you.
We have Tressa Pankovitz, who's the co-director of Reinventing America's Schools. While Tressa is not based in Minnesota, she follows successful school reform efforts across the country and can speak to how Minnesota is unique and other high quality examples for us to look at today. Hi, Tressa.
Hi, Taylor. Want me to get started?
That sounds great.
Great. Oh, I think we have our fourth panelist. Why don't you introduce him?
Oh, wonderful. Welcome, Khalik. Thank you for being here.
Yes,
Awesome.
of course. Had a little difficulty getting on, but we're here.
Good. Okay, good. And then last but definitely not least, we have Khalik Rogers, who's the co-director of Center for School Change in the state of Minnesota. So I'm going to first start off with Tressa as we dive into the conversation. And again, attendees and folks joining the webinar, again, introduce yourself in the chat if you're just joining us. Also, feel free to ask us as well as panel and the panelists questions throughout the conversation so we can lift them up for speakers. So question one, Tressa, starting with you today, to further set the stage on the topic today, can you speak to the role of charter, alternative, and innovation schools in the career pathway space? What have you seen from broader research and travel across the country?
Thank you so much, Taylor. And I just want to take 1 second to thank Jim Roberts, the publisher of the 74 Million online education magazine, for his tremendous leadership and partnership on this webinar series. It's been a real joy to work with him. And we hope he'll keep watching our webinars regardless of what the new year brings for him. Taylor, to your question, if you don't mind, I'd just like to give a brief overview really quickly. I'm sure that probably everyone on this webinar, guests, knows what a charter school is and what an innovation school is, but this will live forever on the internet. So for people who may come after us, I just want to quickly say, charter schools are free public schools that are open to all. The only real difference between a charter school and a traditional district school is that their governance model is different. They aren't beholden to the central office bureaucracy, and they were designed to be laboratories of innovation. And that's very important for this conversation. Innovation schools, on the other hand, is a model that we're seeing more frequently, which is awesome. It kind of offers the best of both worlds in many ways. Frequently, it is, again, a free, public, and open public school, K through 12. And the main difference is that they are in partnership with the district. So while they're autonomous from the district to varying degrees in varying districts and varying parts of the country, frequently they'll be in a district facility. They may purchase services like janitorial or food services from the district. But again, they get to design their curriculum and put forth what is working for what the parents of the students in that particular geographical region think is important for their kids. Now, I'm not going to speak to alternative schools because we've got the expert here, Jody, coming up. I'll let her tackle that. But I wanted to just make sure that everybody was clear when we're speaking charter or innovative. They're very similar models in that they have autonomies. So these autonomies are allowing, especially in the high school, secondary space, a lot of these career pathway programs that we're starting to see. And I have had the privilege, I have the best job in the world. I have had the privilege to travel the country and see a lot of this in action and see in action the impact it's having on the students who are participating in these programs. And so if you want to talk about the impact of charter schools and innovation schools on these career pathway programs, I would have to say, in all fairness, that they're really on the cutting edge. They're really on the forefront of innovating, experimenting, being extremely responsive to local workforce needs and local parental needs. And I'm just going to give you a couple examples before I pass it back to you, Taylor. So for example, I hail from California, not too far from Napa Valley, in between Napa and San Joaquin Valley. And in the San Joaquin Valley, there is a program that has career pathways for students in the wine industry. And we're not talking about menial labor in the fields. We're talking about jobs like venting and marketing and vineyard management and event planning and dealing with the logistics of exporting wine from California. And these are careers that without this program would be just foreign to most of the students who participate in them, and many of them are low income and many are minority. So to see this billion-dollar industry in California opened up for high school students through a career pathways program in an independent school is just, it's really incredible. Now we're going to jump across the country to Indianapolis, completely different program, highly urban area. There's a high school there called the Purdue Polytechnical High School, which operates in partnership with Purdue University. And it is a project-based learning school. Students learn skills and use skills that they will use in the workplace. And it provides a pathway to them to the university in the state of Indiana that turns out the graduates who get the highest paying jobs in that state. We're going to take another jump down to rural Texas, completely different. An innovation school zone. The 3 districts partnered to create this charter high school that any student from any of these 3 rural districts could attend. And it allowed them to scale these programs because each of these rural high schools were too small to have much of career pathways variety, on their own. But by combining forces and giving the school some autonomy, we have students who are learning to be welders. They're learning to be electricians. We're not talking about auto mechanics here. We're talking about desperately needed workers in the oil industry, on the oil rigs, in the oil fields. And this program is partnering with local trade unions so that as the students are doing their internship and that they are earning union time. So when they graduate, they're just about a year from journeyman status. And that means like an $80 an hour job. It's just incredible in this rural area. Finally, last one, Providence, Rhode Island. There is the Rhode Island Nurses Institute Charter High School, and it is totally geared for students who are seeking a health career and specifically nursing. And the interesting thing about that program is they are very active in recruiting English as a second language student. And the reason is because nurses dispense medication. And if they can't communicate with their patients, mistakes get made. So that's the goal, to bridge that gap there.
Well, Tressa, that's amazing. So we've been to California, we've been to Indiana, Texas, Rhode Island, we've been all across the country. And now what better region to head to than Minnesota? So Rep. Norris, thank you so much for being here again. Can you speak to how Minnesota really remains at the forefront of innovation in this space, speaking to some of what Tressa mentioned as well? Specifically, the 2 exciting bills that you introduced and championed with bipartisan support this past legislative cycle. What were these policies and how did they help to expand young people's career learning and experiences across the state?
Absolutely. This is a really critical issue for us here in Minnesota. One, we like to think that, we're a pretty innovative state and we've done a lot in terms of education innovation over the years, but also because we're facing a real demographic reality here in Minnesota, like a lot of more northern states have. The population trends in the United States are shifting more toward the south. We're not getting as much of the international migration that has driven a lot of Minnesota's growth in recent decades. And as a result, we're facing a severe worker shortage here in Minnesota. So we need to make sure that every person who is able to, get into our workforce and help to make sure that we continue to have a thriving economy like we have in Minnesota for so long. And so to that end, I was really pleased to, I passed 5 different bills this year related to workforce in various different ways, since it is such a critical issue. But the 2 I want to talk about today are really related, but they have to do with having young people learn trade skills by building affordable housing. And the reason I think this makes so much sense is that, it's not just a win-win, it's a win-win-win. We have young people learn critical trade skills. We help to address our workforce shortage in Minnesota. And on top of that, we get much needed affordable housing in the process as well. I'm sure Minnesota is not unique in the fact that we're in desperate need of affordable housing. So the 2 bills that I had, one provides direct funding to these types of programs. We had a number of them that were already operating in the state of Minnesota. Some were doing it through traditional schools, some were doing it through nonprofit organizations, but they were kind of under this Youth Build umbrella, which is actually a federal program. So many of your states may have this program as well. But Minnesota said, we're going to dedicate some additional resources to this. We basically doubled the amount of state funding that is going to these programs so that the existing programs can expand and scale up. And then we can hopefully bring some of the new ones on as well. So that was one approach that we took, and we passed that bill. The other approach that we took is we said, well, this is a really great way to provide affordable housing. It has these ancillary benefits that I talked about how can we tap into some of the resources we're sending to affordable housing to then also get these additional benefits? So we passed $1 billion housing bill in Minnesota this year to address affordable housing. And one of the buckets that money goes into is a program called the Challenge Grant program that's administered by our state housing finance administration. And this is, I can't remember after we passed this bill how much is in that fund now, but it's definitely in the tens of millions. It may even be over 100 million now that we passed this bill. And so we made a small little change. It was, I think, a one-line bill that said that school districts and charter schools are able to apply to receive this challenge grant funding to fund these basically youth build programs where young people build housing and learn trade skills in the process. So not only have we said we're going to provide some direct funding to this program, but we're also going to open up this much larger pool of funding to programs that want to help young people develop these particular skills and build affordable housing in the process. So we were able to get both bills passed. They received strong bipartisan support. I think this is an issue that everybody from across the political spectrum can agree on, and I was glad that we were able to see that broad support here in Minnesota.
Rep. Norris, I have a few follow-ups that we'll get to in the conversation for you. But one thing you mentioned that I think is so important is, like, I know you have a win-win-win, which I really like, the 3 wins, but it's really, addressing the economic implications of your state, creating a talent development pipeline, creating a skilled workforce, ensuring employers have what they need, but also thinking about individual economic opportunity and expanding that for young people and their future, but also for people through housing and ensuring that they have the basic need of shelter. So I really admire what you have done and the state's done. And I'm really excited to hopefully we have other state leaders on this call today to see some of that replicated and thought about in other areas across our country. Kalik, I think this is a great segue to you. You're the co-director of Minnesota's Center for School Change and have really helped drive a lot of these legislative efforts. I have a couple questions for you, but let's just start off. Can you speak to your personal story and what brings you to this work before I dive into a few more for you?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this work honestly was really close to my lived experience because coming from Chicago, moved up to Minnesota with my family because this was, the land of 10,000 lakes, opportunity, and so much going on. But when my family moved up here, initially we had a very tough time, just like now, for people to find affordable housing. And with that, we ran out of resources pretty quickly. Rental applications we putting in here and there to the point where we ran out of resources. With that being said, there wasn't really any place that a full family could go if they needed support. If you were going to go somewhere, it had to be literally a single parent home or a single parent situation. And so my father had to leave and my mother and the rest of my siblings we were in the shelter. And for me, that was something that I never forgot that experience. Even in kindergarten, we had to draw pictures of our homes, and I was kind of stuck because I didn't know how to describe the environment that I was in. And like for me, as I grew up, I started to just notice that this wasn't just a personal issue that I had, but there were many others in my community that were either homeless or on the brink of homelessness. And so when I got bigger and older, I was able to use my voice a little bit more. And thankfully, I was able to find a great mentor, Joe Nathan, who helped me channel some of those thoughts and energy that I had to put them towards seeing how I can be an advocate for the community. And through that, he asked me one day, he's like, hey, what is something that you want to personally work on? I said, I want to tackle this issue of youth homelessness within the state because I feel like it's very overlooked. And I know peers and friends that are experiencing that right now. And so we started this journey of just amplifying the issue within the state. And as we got wins, in the legislature by having a human-centered approach to this work, and not just data, but having people who've had these lived experiences testify about the issues that they're facing and how just being derailed by accident or injury or getting a call to visit one of their kids at school because something's going on can really change their ability to keep a job and ultimately lose housing and other methods and things of that nature. So through that effort, we were able to get $20 million allocated for the next 6 years at the legislature. Part being because I was asked to come and testify again. I testified once and they said, please come back and tell us more from your lived experience on why this is needed. And through that, I understood that there's one thing having, supportive housing or affordable housing, but how do you actually scale? And for me, I already understood that, hey, if these youth don't have jobs, if they don't have scalable jobs, and that are introduced to them at an earlier intersection, such as high school, is going to be tough because not every youth has the bandwidth or the ability to go to college right away. Oftentimes, they're more focused on, especially inner city youth and rural youth as well, are focusing on what they have to do day to day. They're handling bills. They often don't get to just spend their money on bubble gum. They have to pay things and help out around the house and things of that nature. So that's where we formed a meeting actually where we brought legislators and community members, and we worked with Ramsey County. It was also helped funded by Youth Prize to help give me funds for research and to gather data on these issues. And also the Morning Foundation helped out a lot as well. And we utilized those funds to really, bring a real call to action. And that's where we came to understanding that asking the youth, what programs work best for you? And that's one of the things I want to emphasize is that oftentimes, spaces or schools and things of that nature focus on the deficits of youth, but what we focus on are the strengths and seeing what they can produce and bring to create the changes they want to see.
Leek, I love what you mentioned about human-centered design, and I think that is really relevant to your last point on making sure that the programs and policy are informed by the people really benefiting and would benefit from the programs that we're establishing at the state, local, but even federal level. Kalik, one last question for you before I go to Jody. As you were convening these partners, did that really help ensure the system level reform at the state level because you saw that these policymakers were connected with people in the community while also being informed by the young people themselves? What did you see as kind of the success that got you to this place through your advocacy efforts?
Yeah, I would say it was really like cross-sector collaborations. Like, oftentimes places are in these organizations and people who are doing similar work are often in silos. And even if they're not doing similar work, they can still add value in different ways of supporting. And by bringing these people together and having, cross-sector collaborations and more of like a design thinking, how do we get the end user to be a part of this design of a solution we're creating? That makes everyone band together and everyone adds their piece to the puzzle. And through that, those type of collaborations actually end up making a bigger difference because having the insights of people who live the issues help fill in those gaps that are often overlooked.
That's so powerful. And I think it's, again, a great segue to our next question, because Jody, you're operating and supporting one of these wonderful models that Kalik's talking about, really serving the young people in your community. Can you explain what the GAP School is? Can you explain your mission and what the home construction program that you've implemented looks like? We actually had a question about what your curriculum is in the chat. So I think this is actually, if you could touch on that, Jody, that would be wonderful. And again, I'll start there, but then we'll want to hear also about kind of what the day-to-day looks like that's ensured your success and how this effort has opened doors to students.
Sure, Taylor, thanks. Yeah, it was been just a real pleasure working with Matt and Kalik and Joe at the legislature last winter. Let's chop it up again in 2024. So I'm the executive director of Change Inc. We're a community-based nonprofit here in the Twin Cities, been operating since the 1960s. I'll just read our mission statement and vision statement. It's Change Inc. envisions a world in which children, youth, and young adults, regardless of their place of birth or economic resources, succeed in school and grow to their full potential. In this world, families are embraced by empowered communities. And our mission, Change Inc. utilizes the power of relationships and community to create educational, training, and healing opportunities for children, youth, young adults, and families so we can achieve highest ambition. Gap School is our the school that we administer. It is located on the west side of St. Paul. St. Paul is a very neighborhoody city, and it's important that we are connected to that geography. Gap School is considered is accredited, and it is considered a state-approved alternative program, or called a SAP, through the Department of Education, and we are a contracted site with the St. Paul Public Schools. We also provide adult basic education. Our students, we have about 100 enrolled currently. They are 16 to 24 years old. Over 90% receive free and reduced meals, and over 90% are from communities of color. At GAP, they are enrolled full-time. They are earning a high school diploma, and every graduate gets the diploma, but also earns industry recognized certificate. So we have two career pathways. We have construction, which we'll talk a little bit more about here today, and we also have health career pathway. And so every senior is in one of those pathways and transitions into full-time employment. We are a youth build model, so we operate a youth build program. That is our career pathway. A little bit about youth build. The sort of model is that students need to be earning a high school diploma or a GED. Young people need to be at risk of dropping out or have dropped out of mainstream education. Worksite training needs to be provided, so that hands-on piece. Also, community service and service learning, leadership development, and all the kinds of supports need to be in place to remove barriers to success. In our construction pathway, we renovate and build single-family homes in our community on the west side. And our homes then are turned around and sold to a family that is experiencing low income. And in this last year, we completed a new build, and pretty cool thing. One of our graduates, who was a Karen a refugee who became a realtor, sold the home. So that was pretty fantastic. Currently, we have 4 adjacent lots, and we built and sold that first one, like I said, in the spring, and we already have started on number 2. They're hurrying to try and get it framed up, so they're not working outside in a Minnesota winter. So it's lots of motivation there. Our graduates enter full-time employment with a family sustaining wage. Many enter apprenticeship programs. We have a really good track record there. Many of our graduates are themselves homeowners, which is pretty fantastic. And there's just a great sense of community pride in the fact that these young people have built these homes in their own community. So that's kind of us in a nutshell.
That's amazing, Jody. And I love the fact that you mentioned a few of the paths that have been enabled from the program for individuals. So not only are maybe they continuing on their education through apprenticeship programs and other models, but they're also going on to full-time employment. Sounds like even potentially starting their own business, but also owning homes and building that wealth themselves. So Jody, quickly before I move on, can you speak a little bit more to what a day-to-day might look like for one of your students in the construction program specifically?
Sure. And right now we do have a large number, and I think Tressa, you said the Rhode Island program, we have a large number of English as a second language learners as well. And so for a lot of those students, they have 2 hours of English language learning. Then they'll spend 2 hours on the work site. The houses that we're building are about 2 blocks away from the school. So they're able to go there for 2 hours of work site training. The other 2 hours, so there's 6 hours a day. It's a full school program. Breakfast, lunch is provided. Then they're also earning that industry recognized certificate in construction. It's the MC3, which is the multi-craft core curriculum that's supported by national unions. And then in health careers, it's the certified nursing assistant credential as well. So they'll be working towards that. They also have a number of academic, depending on where they're at with the state standards, because they're earning a high school diploma. They're also involved in academics and, math, reading, language arts, science, social studies, and just being able to get through that as well.
Well, Jody, that's one of PPI's favorite things, as Tressa can speak to next. We love to see the academic and career learning alongside each other to really contextualize what you learn in the classroom to real world experiences. And we also know that these work-based learning experiences and earn and learn models are just some of the highest qualities, and we see the highest returns on public and private investment for the people that participate in them. So we're really excited to hear that. And last thing, because I know Jody, we can speak your praises much longer, but I also love to see kind of that holistic support that's associated, knowing that the site is right next door to the school, so you don't have to think about the challenges with transportation and that cost. Additionally, thinking about meals being provided, we know that's a huge barrier of just education generally, whether it's at the secondary or post-secondary level, is knowing that when people are in school, they might be potentially missing a meal. So how can we provide that for them? So I really love the fact that you mentioned those two things. And then we have a wonderful question in the chat too, which I'm going to move on, Jody, for purposes of time, but Kalik, Matt, and Jody, in your next responses, would love for you to address it. We have a parent on the line who is from St. Paul Public Schools, and they want to know if the work of GAP is being replicated in the public school system, and is the public school talking about how they can integrate some of these career pathways models. Awesome. Well, this has been so wonderful to hear more about the efforts at the state level, Kalik, your advocacy efforts, and then also how this is working on the ground through the GAP school. Tressa, I'm going to go back to you. In your opening remarks, it's clear you have a ton of expertise on education reform that's happening across the country. But I did just want to, ask you what you find so unique about this model and these state policy efforts, and what really excites you. And do you think other districts and states can follow suit and kind of replicate what Minnesota's doing?
Well, I think the most obvious thing that is unique, and I've only seen it one other place, not that I've been everywhere or know everything by any stretch of the imagination, big country, but that a model, I'm not going to call Jody's model a pilot, but a standalone model is now funded to be brought to scale, right? And that may go to the next question that you just asked from the chat. We saw that in Texas. With the rural schools innovation zone, it started with just 3 counties. Fourth county wanted to join, and then some other counties heard about it and got interested, and they were very active in sharing the model. And last session, they got a funding stream passed for this and signed into law. So just like the representative success here, it's really cool to see innovation in these alternative school models that show success, and then go on to become something that is replicable and validated by state legislatures. And that's one reason why we do these webinars, is because we hope that by amplifying innovative, unique, and successful efforts like what we see at the GAP school, that somebody somewhere, whether it's today live or in the future, is going to find this webinar and say, hey, we have a housing shortage. Hey, we have a nursing shortage. We've got a teacher shortage, and sort of be empowered to think if they can do it there, why can't we try it here? The Rural Schools Innovation Zone is entirely replicable. You could do it, you could take that model and plunk it down in a big city. It doesn't matter. But of course, the one thing about Minnesota that is, always going to be unique is that it was the birth of the charter school movement about 33 years ago. And so it is not surprising that Minnesota continues to lead the way in education innovation.
Tressa, that's so helpful. And, Tressa, I'm going to actually start here, and then I think this is a good segue into the question we have for Representative Norris and Kalik. But I should have mentioned at the start of the webinar, but, PPI, we have, while we're a small but mighty place, we have roots across the country, not only through Tressa's amazing work, but through other entities. And we did a poll recently just to see what working Americans think, but also what young voters are thinking about and what's top of mind for them. And I will say, from working Americans, the things that they want to see public policy makers invest in is apprenticeship and work-based experiences, exponentially more than college pathways, which I think is really interesting. And also, Tressa, we know that young voters, their major priority right now is the housing crisis and how we can create more affordable housing for people. So I know, Tressa, I did just want to pass that back to you quickly to see if you have any thoughts on that as well, and how some of the data we have about voters across the country is also influencing some of these efforts that you've seen across the country. And then also, of course, I think highlights why this program in Minnesota is so important and successful.
Yeah, that's right. Affordable housing is far and away in the polling and the surveys we've done and our partners have done the biggest concern. And you can see why, because there's a national housing shortage and it's very, very expensive and getting only more expensive. Mortgage rates are not helping at the moment, but even when that is alleviated to some extent, that's not going to bring hundreds of thousands of houses that are needed online. So I think that's one reason that this program that they're doing here is so important, because anybody who's tried to get a contractor lately for anything, it's like, good luck. Make your plans for 18 months out, because you're just going to have a really hard time in many, many places in the country finding people with these skills. And I think that's really important too, is that we need to differentiate between the movement that we're seeing now with career pathways, with the old Voc Tech shop classes from the mid 1900s. These kids are not just learning to make a picnic table for the backyard. They're in dual enrollment with community colleges. They're taking academic courses in the skills that they're learning. They're, as Jody said, having work-based certifications. In some cases, they're graduating with, trade union hours under their belt. One of the young girls in that school in Texas, she's planning on starting her oil trucking company. At 18, she's just like going for it. So I think it just, I think college is always going to be relevant. I think we need deep thinkers and a college educated workforce, but it is really nice to see paths to good family sustaining jobs being promoted right now.
Thanks, Tressa, for expanding on that. And I think everything you said is so important. Matt and Kalik, I do want to just pass it back to you based on what Tressa just said. We know that college is critical, and we know that those paths right now hold a really strong return on investment for students. But we also know that majority of our Americans don't go to college. And I also used this stat earlier in the webinar that we have 4.1 million young people that are not attached to work or education. So how can we continue to build awareness around these models that Tress is talking about, but that you all are really championing in Minnesota? How can we replicate them? What are some other pathways, initiatives that you think have the potential to see real scale? I'm going to pause there, and then I do have a few follow-ups for you both on that question. Rep Norris, you want to start with you and then go to Kalik?
Yeah, I can definitely start. I think the challenge with this is, before I got elected, I was the policy director at a statewide nonprofit for youth here in Minnesota. And so I spent a lot of time up at the Capitol advocating on behalf of youth issues like this one. And the challenge we face in the policy realm around this is, like I said before, we were easily able to get bipartisan support for, the particular bills that I passed, and for, many similar issues like this, all the different types of things we're talking about during today's webinar. I think where the challenge is in the policy space is actually getting those to rise in the prioritization when the rubber kind of meets the road and the budget is actually formulated. It's easy for people to sign on to bills. I always, it's the feel-good part of the legislative session when everybody's got great ideas and everybody's supporting each other's ideas. And then, you get up toward the, at least here in Minnesota, we've got our committee deadlines that come about halfway through the legislative session. And that's when the rubber really meets the road and hard choices have to be made. And you've only got, so much money to spend, and everybody's fighting to get their piece of it. And too often, programs like this do not rise to the same level of priority as funding our kind of traditional educational system. Now, certainly, we need to continue to support our more traditional school system, but we also have to recognize that a one size fits all solution does not work. I would argue it's never really worked for students, and we've just tried to get by doing it. But that's not satisfactory anymore. I just actually got back from a meeting with a young person here in Minnesota who's he's about 20 years old. He's a young person. He's very active in our politics, has helped me get a couple of bills passed. And he was talking about how in school, when his parents would go to conferences, it was always like, he's got a lot of potential, but he talks too much and he won't sit still. And it's like, well, why were we trying to fit this square peg into a round hole? Like, there are different educational models that work for different personalities and skill sets. And so I think we need to, find ways collectively, for those of us who believe in the importance of this work, to raise the importance of this when it comes to the prioritization in the budget, because we can get the feel good, bills introduced and signed on to, but can we actually get those to be an increasingly large percentage of our education spend?
Matt, that's such a good point. And I think that's a very similar challenge at the federal level. We see a lot of bipartisan support on this, but when it comes to funding, when it comes to really prioritizing over policies, we don't always see that there. So I think that I really appreciate you talking about the success and the bipartisan support, but also the challenges that you've seen around funding, especially. Khalid, anything to add?
Yes, especially just considering the amount of interest that we find from schools and from communities that actually support this work. But their constant question, just like that was in the chat, is how do we pretty much combat the status quo of education, and how do we start getting collaborative efforts that actually can work with schools and kind of bridge that gaps? Because schools like funding, of course. So a lot of the questions, well, how do we even afford the equipment? How do we pay for staff members to actually fill in the gap of time and things of that nature? So what we're doing at Center for School Change is creating case studies that you can find on our website. And these case studies are actually, we went to schools all throughout. I think we got about 5 or 6 of them. Went to schools that have these programs throughout the state of Minnesota to really understand how they implemented these programs. How did they find success? And we'll find that a lot of those schools have similar themes about how they were able to come together to sustain these programs. But even more so, there are things that are within each community that are different. And I think that's the thing that a lot of people may not, focus on, is what do you have within your backyard? Who's around you? What organizations are around? Who could you reach out to? How can you align your mission with the mission of another organization? It could be a 3M, it could be a Cargill, it could be all these organizations that have philanthropic dollars to give. They have resources, they have things, but there has to be kind of that intermediary person or organization that actually comes and gives them direction on where they can actually make an impact. That's not just from observation, because a lot of help is people are being helped, but it may be displaced. It may not be the priority thing that they actually need. It can be something down the road. So what we're focusing on is really not, of course, we're happy about the legislation passing, but the key thing is to make sure that these programs are getting implemented into the community.
That's really important. You mentioned intermediaries, Cleek, and then Matt, you mentioned some challenges. I will just, before passing back to Jody, what if in states that might not have as much bipartisan support as Minnesota right now on this issue, or have different state and local contexts, what are, maybe if you could each briefly say one recommendation you have from them based on your experience in the past legislative cycle and as you look to the future?
Yeah, I would say just one key thing of advice is really, I would say, communicate and talk about what you're doing. Share it. A lot of times you may have a great idea. My mother always said you can't have a light and put it under the table. You got to put it where people can see it. And with that, I've noticed even with what we're doing, there's been an uptick because people are now seeing the visibility. We're actually having real conversations with state agencies like the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency. They worked with us as well to start bridging that gap of communication between state and community on creating an actual webinar where we described how institutions and schools can get ready for these RFPs that are going to start. Not just focusing on the places that are green and ripe and ready for the opportunity, but how do you get spaces that are in the red or orange to start prepping to really take on these opportunities?
I would say from the political perspective, in terms of charting a course for getting these sorts of programs funded and advanced at your state capitals, I think the great thing about these sorts of programs is there are so many benefits that there's lots of different interest groups who should, in theory, be supportive of it. And so it's figuring out, which of those groups is influential in your particular political situation in your state. Is it, labor unions? Is it education reform folks? It could be any number of key interest groups. But because there's so many benefits, at least one of them should be excited about this and kind of latch on to them. And affordable housing advocates, that's another one. Figure out who's got the political sway at your particular state capital, and then use them as kind of the lead to drive the train for you.
I love that. And Matt, you're reading my mind right now because, you say interest groups, and Jody, this is going to be, you're going to have the last question before I do one final one for the panelists today. But Representative Norris, I think that's such a good point. Like, you have a lot of people who think this is beneficial, but we also know it takes a lot of people, Kalik, to your point, to make these programs successful. And you mentioned the intermediary function, you mentioned housing, you mentioned workforce, the school system. Jody, I wanted to go back to you and just say, we know, as Kalik mentioned, to implement this on the ground, it takes partnership, and that's critical to success. What are the partnerships that have been created through this home construction program at the Gap School? Can you speak to if employers are at the table? I know you mentioned unions previously. If you could speak more to that. Are there higher education partners there? And how are you ensuring students have these options you mentioned when they complete your program?
Sure. Just real quick, I was smiling listening to Matt and Kalik talk and watching Joe work the chat over here. And Matt using the metaphor of a train, because I was just thinking, I just get on Joe Nathan's train. Where the train's leaving the station, I'm going to be on it because I think the three of these entities just speaks to partnership as well, because I'm representing, kind of the day-to-day, we're focused on these young people, we're focused on this house and all this other stuff that's happening out here. I have to be connected to other groups that are paying attention to what's happening and inviting me into that conversation. So the thing about my agency is we show up. That's what we're known for, showing up. And so I think that's part of what we do. In terms of our partners, absolutely, they are critical to this work. Like I mentioned, we are a Youth Build program, so we are connected to Youth Build USA. We are a national affiliate of that organization. We are also part of the Minnesota Youth Build Coalition. In fact, we're having a meeting this afternoon. That's 15 Youth Build programs throughout the state of Minnesota, and we provide a lot of support for one another. We are very closely connected to Ramsey County Workforce Solutions. They are a big partner of ours. I'll give a little quick example. We were able to speak last week with the National Association of county commissioners that met in St. Paul, and to spotlight this partner activity that we're involved in that's called the Driver's License Academy. So realizing that very many of our young people are not able to get licenses in Minnesota, we no longer have driver's ed in school. So we've come together to address the issue of how to help people get their permit. And that's been just a real terrific project we worked on together. We have an architect firm, MSR, that does pro bono work for us. Our last build was so green that we won a $10,000 award from the National Green Council with them, which was pretty fantastic. Local unions and apprenticeship programs, as I've mentioned, it's not only in terms of getting opportunities post-graduation, but they work alongside, demonstrate things on the job site, that sort of thing. So they're very much engaged and involved. One of our main employers is Anderson Windows. And I think we have really hundreds of graduates that work at Anderson Windows. So they've become just a real terrific partner. We do work with local community colleges, Century College, St. Paul College, particularly in the healthcare pathway. That's more significant. And then our key funders, Minnesota Department of Economic Development, for sure, Ramsey County Solutions, and then we have a Department of Labor grant too. And to sustain these relationships or these partnerships is just relationship. And everything you can do to have people be engaged and excited about the work. The Youth Build model requires that we have a college and career readiness director, that we have pathway managers, that we've got a transition coordinator, that we've got case managers. Certainly we've got academic licensed teachers, we've got social workers, we've got, all of this stuff to make this work. And then it also requires a 12-month follow-up. So once our young people graduate, high school diploma, industry recognized certificate, the transition coordinator has helped them to get that full-time position. We follow them for 12 months to provide that extra support until they are totally on their own. And they are making not $80 an hour, that's, I don't know, Texas Oil, but they're making, $30 an hour. And I know the two that testified with Matt and Khalik are making more than their teachers are making. So that's going well.
Jody, that's wonderful. And we do, I think, have time for one more question. So I'm going to choose from the chat. Joe, you're amazing answering a lot of these in there, but one that came from Jim and I think aligns with someone we had who was anonymous in the Q&A section was, what are other key partners that you all are thinking about that have helped to advance what you've already done that have been needed, but then also thinking about, like, I love the question about how we kind of replicate this in just the public school system, or how can we ensure that this exists earlier? I love the question on, like, we talk about high school a lot. This series is called Future of High School, but we know middle school is an important place to reach students as well, and really start this learning and just understanding of the career opportunities that are available to them earlier and more often. So I'll allow all speakers to respond to that. I know that was a broad question, but want to make sure we get in some of the questions from those attending. And I think they're really spot on and great questions for the group.
I can talk a little bit about the public school piece. I know Joe has been doing, like you said, doing a great job of answering some questions in there. And I know there was a question specifically about St. Paul Public Schools. But I know two of the school districts in my area. I've got three school districts within my house district. And two of the three have programs like this, and one of them is at, I think, the Alternative Learning Center, but the other one is at the regular high school. They build the house literally right in the high school parking lot. So the students, just when it's that time of the day in their schedule, they go out there with their teacher and they work on the house, and other students in the school can see it going up, and neighbors in the area who are driving by the school can see it, and then by the end of the year it's complete and they find a lot to move it to. So this can definitely be done. It doesn't have to be in some non-traditional school model. You can absolutely do these sorts of programs within a traditional public school.
Anyone want to, Khalik, go ahead.
Yeah, and to add on to that, this year actually there was legislation passed on civic engagement and like service learning laws as well. And that they actually allocated $1 million in funding that now allows schools to apply and to partner with organizations to think of how they can make social impact of some sort, or service learning. And that's a way that you can actually involve schools that are at the earlier intersection, like middle school and things of that nature too, on how they can start learning by doing earlier in life, meeting these career, community members and seeing what their careers are, seeing what type of impact that they're making. They can really help guide them. Because I know in the chat there was a question on, like, how do we have this earlier intersection? Because students kind of fall off in 9th grade, but giving them more experiences to find their niche or find something that they're actually successful in, having a sense of completion, like finishing something. And, having like, that was the biggest feeling for me when I was in school, is when I actually got something done and I could look and say, wow, look what we did. And there's plenty of opportunities for people to see examples on that, on the Center for School Change website. And also Good Riddance, LLC.org is my website as well, where you can see some of these service learning, project-based learning initiatives being done within schools.
Thanks, Kalik. I love the civic learning and social impact work. Tress and I want to do a whole other webinar on that. So attendees, stay tuned, because we're really hoping to tackle that in the new year with you all as well. Awesome. Okay. Final question before we wrap today. Oh, Tressa, go ahead. I see your hands raised before we do our final. Want to pass to you.
Yeah, just really quick. This is like a smorgasbord of things, wonderful things to react to. But first of all, I want to say kudos to Matt for recognizing that one size does not fit all, and never really did. But I also want to commend Jody for, doing the day-to-day administration as a nonprofit of this school. And I will say that where I've gone and where I've studied, it seems that some of the most successful models are partnered with a nonprofit. One in Fort Wayne is with a nonprofit university, Texas Wesleyan University. And I also just want to throw out that, you don't have to administer the day-to-day necessarily. Nonprofits can help incubate these schools. They can work with the community to find out what's needed. They can do the workforce development studies and then help incubate them. And there are national resources out there. There are organizations that do this work. One is Empower Schools. Another is Bellwether Associates. And so if you're starting from scratch and you just kind of like, I don't even have a roadmap for this, reach out to us and we can put you in touch with some people that do this work full time.
+1, Tressa. Such great flags. Great. Okay. Last question for everyone this afternoon. Rapid fire. Can you all, really broad question, but can you just share any final thoughts that you would like to leave the audience with today? Whether that's a point that may not have been covered that you think should be, a policy recommendation for those listening, for federal or state leaders, or anything else that's on your mind. Tressa, not to put you on the spot again, but can I start with you?
I was actually answering the question in the chat.
Okay, I'm gonna come back to you for your final thoughts. Okay, awesome. Jody, I'll go to you next.
Sure. I want to make a plug for women in construction. That's just to say about our program that we're very interested. As we compared wage earning of what are primarily young women who are in the health career pathway, and then are primarily young men who are in the construction pathway, there is no comparison to their postgraduate wages. And so really trying to pay attention to those opportunities and increasing the number of women in the building trades is something that I think is important and that we're wrapping our arms around.
Such a great flag, and something, again, we could also spend a whole webinar on and how we increase representation across these sectors. So thank you so much for sharing that. Kalik, I'll go to you next.
Yeah, I would just say, don't wait on Superman. There's a lot of things that can be done just with the people that are in your surrounding area and backyard. And like, this is a testament. I've been knowing Matt for like 6-7 years now. And just as I've been growing up and as he was grown, but I was a young person when I first met him, but being in proximity of people that are doing things that are bigger than them, and just seeing where you can plug in. Everyone has their superpower. I look at it as like a Justice League. What can you contribute? What can you contribute? And things of that nature. But the more we collectively come together to tackle these big economic issues and workforce issues that we see, we can make a difference the more we work together. So that's just my piece.
I love that. Tressa, now I'll try you again.
Well, there's always political struggles, as Matt said, when the rubber meets the road over funding and, philosophies around how these career pathways should be funded or, where they should go. But I will say it's really refreshing to see that this space has become kind of, I don't want to say trendy because that trivializes it. And I don't mean that, but it is something that it doesn't seem to be like there's a lot of left, right push-pull on right now. I think a lot of people, most people agree that we need a workforce. We need people to have jobs, and we need youth to be engaged. So I'm really glad that innovation in this space is not as politicized as we see it in some other spaces. And I would just encourage people to think about that. One size does not fit all. We need schools that have autonomy and freedom to innovate, whether they're focused on sending kids to college or whether they're focused on sending kids directly into the workforce. It should not be politicized in one area and not in the other.
Agreed, Tressa. Great point. Matt, final words for us today.
Yeah, thanks. And just despite what Kalik may think, I still feel like I'm growing up. So I'm still learning and growing, and it's been fun to get to be on that journey with some amazing young people like Kalik. And that's actually the advice that I would give. Is center young people in advocating for these programs. I've seen it work wonders when young people come into spaces like state capitals and share their voices. It can really cut through the clutter. And so I would make sure that as part of your coalition, that you're centering those young people and let them, in many ways, be the engine that drives our metaphorical train. I'll also say if you've got lawmakers in your states who are interested in this and want to learn more about my experience, feel free to have them connect with me. I'm always happy to chat with my colleagues from across the country. But let those young people take the lead for you, and they'll take you to great places.
You all are wonderful speakers. Thank you so much for giving us your time today. And thank you, attendees, for staying on with us for the hour. Thanks all again, and talk soon.
Thanks, everybody.